anatomists and physiologists. This is part 3 of our reproductive series. Today we're talking about male reproductive physiology. So a quick recall into male reproductive anatomy is that sperm are produced in the testis, and then this is a picture of the testis here, inside these tubules called seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous tubules, that's where we produce sperm. And then because it's a tubule, we have a wall and a lumen, and that's what we're looking at in this picture here. So we have the wall of that tubule and then the lumen. And of course, that lumen is where the sperm cells are released. And there's several cell types that play a role in sperm formation. The first and the most important that I'll highlight in pink to remind us that they're important are spermatogenic cells. Spermatogenic cells are the major players here because they actually make the sperm. And these cells are supported by cystinocytes. Susteno meaning like to sustain, right? These are support cells and they help form this like blood testis barrier, which aids in keeping the sperm away from the body because this could launch immune response. But it also provides cystinocytes, they provide nutrients, aid in sperm movement, and of course the movement of the sperm cells precursors that we'll talk about in a little bit. And they also release testicular fluid. So they do a lot of stuff. So there's nutrients, testicular fluid, which helps the sperm cells move through those seminiferous tubules and out of the testis. And then they also help in regulating spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis is sperm making. So that's the process of making the gamete sperm. We also have other cell types that aid in this whole process. We have myeloid cells. Myeloid cells are a little bit muscle-like. They're kind of like smooth muscles. And they contract to help move the sperm along through all of these seminiferous tubules. Lastly are interstitial endocrine cells. Interstitial means between the spaces, so they kind of like live in between this wall and that wall. Those interstitial endocrine cells, they also are called Leydig cells, Leydig cells. That's a synonym. They make hormones called androgens. The most important of these, I'm going to highlight in pink, being testosterone. So testosterone is a type of androgen, and that is very heavily involved with male reproductive physiology. So for the rest of this lecture, we're going to be talking about that process, spermatogenesis. And how sperm are made is through the process of meiosis. So spermatogenesis, that's what this figure is about. It's figure 27.11 from our text. This is meiosis, which we talked about in the previous video. Remember that the process of meiosis starts with a diploid cell of 2 copies of a chromosome, and that cell type that males have are called spermatogonia. This is labeled with spermatogonium because that's the singular, but the plural is spermatogonia. And those are stem cells. When stem cells divide, it's often asymmetrical, which means that they produce different types of daughter cells from a division event. And this is true of spermatogonia during puberty and like beyond. So notice what's happening here is that one spermatogonium is producing this cell and that cell, and they're different types of daughter cells. The first one is a type A daughter cell. It's the spermatogonium making another spermatogonium. So spermatogonium will make another spermatogonium that's called a type A daughter cell. But the other cell that gets produced during that division event is a type B daughter cell. And a type B daughter cell will become a primary spermatocyte. That is a cell, primary spermatocyte, that will become sperm. So type B daughter cells eventually become sperm. So first what happens is we have a primary spermatocyte, we develop into a secondary spermatocyte, we become a spermatid, and then a sperm. So we'll talk about each of those. From the previous video, we know that meiosis 1 results in one haploid daughter cell that will then divide again. So we see that type B daughter cell will mature into a primary spermatocyte and go through the process of meiosis 1, and that's exactly what we see here. We have two haploid daughters. And then we know that each of those haploid daughters in the process of meiosis 2 will become two haploid daughters. Those haploid daughters are called spermatids. Spermatids are precursors to sperm. They're not sperm cells yet because they're just little bubbles. The spermatids are just little bubbles, as we can see in our bigger picture here, just little bubbles. They don't look like sperm yet because they need to lose some of their characteristics and adopt others. So we have one primary spermatocyte resulting in 4 sperm cells eventually down the line. As in all of this, meiosis is happening. The cells are being pushed closer. So let me zoom out a little bit on my picture here. So this is the edge of that wall. This is the lumen of that wall of that seminiferous tubule. So notice that from our stem cell, our spermatogonium, as we become sperm, we get pushed closer and closer and closer to that lumen until the sperm, those 4 sperm cells, are released into the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. We're going to talk more about how spermatids become sperm in the next slide. Okay, so spermatids are the cells that are produced at the end of meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, but they're not sperm yet. In order to become sperm, they must undergo another process called spermiogenesis. So I'm going to write some definitions here on the side of this slide for you. So spermatogenesis is taking spermatogonium, the stem cell, to a series of steps for sperm. That's spermatogenesis. Spermiogenesis is taking that spermatid to a sperm. Separate but related processes. And those words are really similar. I did not make them up. I'm so sorry. Spermatogenesis is the formation of 4 sperm. Spermiogenesis is the maturation of a spermatid to a sperm. Okay, so what happens is we have this spermatid, a little bubble, and that spermatid will start to lose a lot of its cytoplasm. It also adds some important structures, and then it also ends up adding a tail onto that sperm. So when we look at a matured sperm, there's a head, and that head has a little like helmet on it, And that helmet has an important name. It's called an acrosome. So that helmet piece is called an acrosome. Helmet. That is on top of the head, and then behind the head is the midpiece. The midpiece contains lots and lots of mitochondria. So lots of mitochondria. And those mitochondria help power the movement of this tail. The tail is also called a flagellum. It moves in like this whip-like way. And so those sperm then can move as powered by the ATP produced by the mitochondria. But remember that the sperm produced in the seminiferous tubules, the ones released into the lumen of those seminiferous tubules, are still immature. So they will need to finish their maturation and then they'll be stored in the epididymis, which is the part right after the testis, until ejaculation. We know that hormonally, endocrine function is led by the hypothalamus, and this is true for the reproductive system too. We also know that the hypothalamus works closely with the anterior pituitary. So here we have the hypothalamus, here we have the anterior pituitary. And we know that the anterior pituitary can act on the gonads. And we talked about this before as the HPG axis. H for hypothalamus, pituitary, gonads. HPG axis. What happens is that the hypothalamus releases this releasing hormone called GnRH. So there's all the steps I'm talking about are all outlined here in blue. But that releasing hormone from the hypothalamus called GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, will act on the anterior pituitary, which will then release our two gonadotropins, FSH and LH. Remember that these are tropic hormones, FSH and LH, which means that they're going to act on their target tissue to then cause release of hormones. And that's exactly what happens. They act on the gonads. So for FSH, that's step 3 here if you're following along. FSH acts on the process of spermatogenesis. So FSH stimulates spermatogenesis because it acts on cystinocytes. Cystinocytes have this protein called ABP. That protein ABP from the cystinocytes stands for androgen binding protein. ABP. And what happens is that helps make sure there's a lot of testosterone in the seminiferous tubule. So we want to keep those levels of testosterone high in the seminiferous tubule because that's what's going to make spermatogenesis happen. The other thing that happens is that LH is released, and when LH is released, it acts on those interstitial endocrine cells. This causes the release of testosterone. Notice that those interstitial cells will release testosterone. Testosterone acts to help with spermatogenesis, but note that testosterone also has lots of other effects on the body. So testosterone acts at other body sites. So some examples of this are like, so testosterone is a steroid hormone, right? And remember that steroid hormones act by doing gene activation. And for more on that, head back to our endocrine lecture for more on steroid hormones. Anyways, what this means is that testosterone will end up causing the cell to make certain proteins, right? And testosterone, of course, it acts on the testis, but there also that helps with the development of male secondary sex characteristics. So secondary sex characteristics. These are things like body hair, facial hair, pubic hair, axillary hair, for some folks, chest hair. It also causes enlargement of the larynx. And a larger larynx then results in a lower voice. It also thickens the skin and makes it a little bit more oily. It also increases the size of bones and their density, and muscles and their mass. Testosterone is also responsible for influencing certain behaviors like male sexual response and libido, and that's a topic for a separate video. Okay, so once those testosterone levels are normalized, this kind of shuts off FSH and LH, which then shuts off the anterior pituitary, which shuts off the hypothalamus. There's also this hormone inhibin, which helps prevent FSH release as a way to regulate spermatogenesis. But again, this is all very much a regulated process. This slide is showing you kind of the ebb and flow of testosterone throughout life. So shortly after fertilization, shortly after birth, there's some spikes in testosterone production, but we kind of like go back down to basal levels until that major shift, which is at puberty. Lots and lots of testosterone is produced till we kind of level off and plateau at the adult level. And then about age 60 or so, we start to kind of like decline that testosterone production. The red line here is testosterone, and that dotted blue line is sperm production. So notice that sperm production really tracks with testosterone post-puberty.